Welcome. This is Elizabeth Fulgaro. With me today, Chaplain Lisa Northway, U.S. Army. Chaplain Lisa, we've been talking about the spiritual warfare, the emotional warfare that actually supersedes in many regards the actual combat that happens on the battlefield for service members and chaplains included. I'm wondering, are you experiencing anything like that currently?
I am. There was a situation that occurred just about 2 years ago, and I was at a required course to be able to go to the next level that finishes off a certain level of professional military education. And it's also one that is required not only for promotion, but it's expected at the level I was at as a brigade chaplain. And I had just reported a few months earlier to my brigade chaplain assignment at Fort Hood, Texas, and was able to get a slot in that critical class. It's just a 2-week course, and I had already done the hard part of what we call intermediate leadership education at a satellite campus, which was truly the hardest academic course of my life. I think it wasn't so much combat that got me in that position, but I was certainly I was on my knees in a combat situation praying for my soldiers. But at that 4-month satellite course, I was on my knees every day praying that God would allow me to stay in the class, because I quickly discovered I was out of my element. And I've been told that the chaplain corps, the JAG corps, and the medical corps, those of us leaders in those branches typically struggle a little bit more. We don't have the operational experience. And very often we know that young lieutenants know more than we do because that's their focus from the beginning for regular officers. So not the specialized branches per se. So I thought, okay, this 2-week course, no big deal. Yeah, I'm excited to come to it. I'm getting excited to see some of my comrades and chaplains I haven't seen in a while. And 2-week course, the requirement, just like in all of our other courses, is you show up, you take the APFT, the Army Physical Fitness Test, and do the height weight. And first, right off the bat, I passed the APFT, the run, 2-mile run, in with just a little bit of time to spare, and like, okay, here we go. And the morning of the height weigh-in, which was a separate morning, or online, and there are some things that you just don't think about anymore, even though maybe you did one time ago. Very often I am the only female chaplain in the environment. I was certainly the only female chaplain in my class. This is not the first time I was at a course at our branch headquarters where I'm the only female. So you almost sort of get used to it. And there's also other things. There's some positive things, because that's not in itself is a bad thing in itself either. But there's some things that are just expectations that go with it. So by the time I was there, I had been a soldier for 31 years. There's certain things that are always in place. When they had the height weigh-in, there's a room, a line and a room for the females, and then there's a line and a room for the males. So if your height is not in the right exact content that it's supposed to be, then you will be also go to another room. So you'll be measured to make sure your body fat fits for your height and your age and your gender. And for the first time in my time as 31 years of being a soldier, 2 kinds of chaos happen. One is the majority of the class, other male chaplains who had never not passed the height part, found themselves in a line. We were all told to be in this line. We would all have to be taped. I would say yes, it was at least half or more And I know that we're in that conversation, that line, there was a little disturbance because we all had felt like we were all measured quite a bit shorter than we were. That's certainly shorter than we had. So we knew there's something wasn't right, but we know not to argue with the NCOs that are in charge of us. And that's usually not going to end in a helpful place. And I remember hearing some of the chaplains in line with me, some of my friends who said, I've never even been measured before. This is a first. I've never had to. And say, oh, and because of the disparity in how it's done, a lot of people aren't aware that females in the military are actually measured on their hips, where just the male soldiers only are measured on their neck and right under at the top of the rib cage.
That's a big
under
difference. That's a huge difference.
It is, especially when you think of if you're only going to tape one gender on the hips, why would you choose the gender that gives birth to babies? Because medical science has told us that it takes 11 years for the hip pelvic area to go back in place, if it ever does at all. And most women have more than one child during those childbirthing years.
Yes.
So the likelihood that they'll ever go back is not real high. I think there's a few blessed soldier sisters out there who have that in the civilian world and also in the military, and I'm really glad for them.
Yes.
I'm quite sure I'm not one of those people, but so only reason I did not know that, though, for my first 31 years of being a soldier, I've been a soldier now for 33 and a half years, and it was because of this experience that followed, and following the height portion, that I found out. First, I was asked, a female NCO came out of the room, and she knew I was going to be next, and I was asked a question. At 6 a.m, you're not aware you're necessarily being asked a question for the first time in your career as a soldier. We're usually starving on purpose a little bit.
Yes.
We know that, okay, let's be a little lean that night before, those little things like that. But knowing that I overall generally always passed. I'm still in the military after these years. We know what it takes to make
Yes,
sure
you do.
that what it takes to pass that exam. And the question I was asked was, Chaplain Northway, do you need a same gender take team? I remember kind of blankly thinking and looking at this long line of males, and basically she's telling me in so many, in the nonverbal, because the nonverbal speaking louder, and the way I'm being asked, like, are we going to have to go figure something out? And she's asking me as a trainee what if
So they don't have it for you.
Right, basically.
Okay.
And I said, well, and and your peers are standing there. And I never really thought of myself as being somebody who maybe would bow to peer pressure. I didn't really see it that way. I was just like, gosh darn it, I've been a soldier for 30 years. Let's just kind of in my mindset, let's just do this. And that was the wrong answer. If they're asking me, a chaplain and an officer, that question, I've also come to realize they're probably not going to ask the private female or the private male recruit. They're just going to do it. And that's why we need to have people who have voices to stand up. And in that moment, what I've struggled with is that I think I've had to take some personal responsibility for adopting a minority complex. In that moment, there were no other female trainees in that line. And in the hunger and the zero, I can blame it on the 0600, 0 dark 30 or whatever. It's probably 0430, I think, that morning in that time frame. I could blame it on that. But what I have to grapple with was I didn't ask for what I needed and what I know I truly want, and what had always been provided for me in 31 years of being a soldier. And that's the very thing I teach my soldiers. Ask for what you need and some things that you want. So at least you don't have the regret that you didn't ask. You can't look backwards and say, well, I did ask, at least. And so went into that space, and a lot of firsts are happening. They're happening not just for me, they're happening for the males too. But in that, the shock and awe of the first going on, and seeing that when you walk into that room, there are two other men. At that point, they're not touching me, but there were two females, but then they had two male observers, and I'm being told to lift my top in front of men. And again, in the hunger and the, everything's just happening really fast.
It's sounding very disorienting.
Yes, I think it was. And, I don't think I can tell you for certain, the specialist, the E4 in me, the young soldier, the private that I was way back in the day, would have been absolutely mortified to lift up. And I think there's something about when you're over 50 and you've had a child, it's like, battle scars, no big deal. Again, that's not the right answer, because if we're being asked that, we have to consider who's not going to be asked.
Very good point.
Because I have the privilege of being an officer and a chaplain, and I need to understand I'm not just answering for myself. I may be answering for my whole gender at that same institution or somewhere else. I'm like, well, there's precedence here. We're creating precedence. But the precedence in my mind, and even my whole experience as a soldier, not just as a chaplain, as a soldier, was that I could always expect that there would be a separate line for the females and the males in a separate room, just as there was a year before that when I was at my ILE satellite course. And when we did the APFT, pass it, go in, if you have to be taped, and it's only women in there. And there's something about that, there's a natural thing. Certainly it could be for some people if they've experienced same gender abuse, that could still be uncomfortable. There's nothing like really glorious or wonderful anyway about that kind of situation, So at the end of that session, though, and a lot of us were very concerned because we were up to an inch shorter than what we normally are. So we knew there was already a problem, but we're probably still trying to recover the fact like they just quoted us a whole inch shorter, like for the most of the class.
Yeah.
And so I'm in that space, just trying to get through it. And then I remember them saying, Chaplain Northway, you're over body fat. I'm like, oh. But I realized, they said, well, we'll tape you again in 7 days. And in my mind, because I've always gotten through it, that, okay, yeah, that's such a small percentage. I'll come back and knock that out. So there was two of us that had to come back. But it's interesting to me that before we got to that 7th day, it was later that day in the classroom, one of our class leaders came to me, probably says, Chaplain North, I want to come to you first because you're the only female in the class, but I'd like to have an open discussion because we're definitely of the mindset that this was an irregular height weight. And I said, okay, sure, I have no problem with that. So he opened it up, and everybody nodded their heads and said, yes, this was a problematic height weight. They were, for the most part, relieved because there was only two of us that appeared it could be potentially punitive to. But we knew we had a week, to get it together, to clarify that discrepancy. And I think we were both confident that, that's something that was doable. So we didn't really, fight the fight about the fact that the inches were all off for all of us. And so 7 days later, again, the two of us, another male chaplain and myself, we go, and they do the height again. And again, it's like, oh my goodness, how could I just be suddenly that short? And I knew I just had my height weight done at home station. And you can think of maybe some of the perfect storms. We've been preparing for the ACFT, and I had a compression injury that was working through. And like, well, maybe that's that. But okay, I've done some diligence this last week. Everything should be okay. And so we get in that room, and I was asked again, just before I go in the room, and say, Chaplain Northway, do you really need a same gender or all female tape team? And again, I'm like, why am I being asked this again? But again, I'm just like, you're starving again, and you're looking around, and there's not a female in that building anywhere. And there's only one female asking me the situation, and it's the first sergeant. And that's pretty authoritative. Like, well, gosh, first sergeant's asking me this, so there seems to be a hardship or something here. So I said, well, let's just go ahead, do this. Again, the wrong answer for me, because I'm not asking for what I truly needed, what I have always had in 31 years of being a soldier.
Which is women measuring you.
Right. Because there is something, I think the way we stand, the way we breathe, when we realize that a men looking at you and you're partially exposed.
That's
it's uncomfortable.
Yes.
Because it's not about, say, well, what if you wear a swimsuit on the beach? It's like, well, these are men, some who, in a small corps that I work with, my husband's not here. I'm in the presence of other people.
It's inappropriate.
And yes. Mm-hmm. And it just, when you look back, it's kind of those hindsight things, and you think, there's just something that was just so wrong about that. And I remember the same person on that second taping who had done the height weight both times before. He was also asked to come into that room and verify the location where the first sergeant was setting the tape. And he seemed really nervous. So it made me think, okay, this is the same person who did our height wrong as far as we know. There was a consensus, but we're not in a position as trainees we can argue that. But then now he's really nervous, and it appears to not ever have done at least taped a woman before. He may have done a height weight before, but there's something about that that just feels, you just get a sense. And again, you're trying to hold in your stomach and be your smallest person for something that your career absolutely depends on. Because the consequence is, if you don't pass the second one, you're automatically sent home.
Oh, my goodness.
It didn't matter that we were a day and a half from graduation, had a 92% in the class. And at the conclusion of that, I was still, Chaplain Northway, you are 1% over body fat.
My word.
And that was absolute devastation. And I remember my senior instructor turning to the first sergeant and saying, because I think he had heard of the scuttle about the height. He says, First Sergeant, would you mind just doing Chaplain Northway's height just one more time? He's not asking for a full height weight. Again, can you just verify her height? And so she says, oh, sure, Chaplain, we can do that. And so she takes me over, and she has the Sergeant First Class who had done it the other 2 times for the whole class. And she watches him put me on the scale, and she sees him measure me. And then she turns to me and she says, Chaplain Northway, could you please get off the scale? It was very, fervent. And I said, yes, First Sergeant. And I got off the side. She turns to the Sergeant First Class, does an on-the-spot correction, and says, did you not know that you were supposed to roll up on the height part of the height weight? And I remember him just stammering. There was no affirmative answer whatsoever that, oh, I forgot, or, yeah, I know I'm supposed to do that. I don't know why I forgot that time, kind of thing. And it was like kind of a no answer, kind of a stammering. And she said, let's do this again. So she says, get back up on there, Chaplain Northway. I said, yes, First Sergeant. And Sergeant First Class says again. Now she says, okay, now we're going to roll up properly. And he does it, and I am taller. And that helps a little bit, but not quite enough. And so the required process is for my instructor to provide me paperwork to dismiss me from the course. What was really tough about that is that it was just 2 months before, 3 months before my primary zone, the first true look at the board to be promoted, typically in the military, if you are not promoted on time, and then you'll get one more chance, which is even harder to look at. For most officers, you're automatically chaptered out of the military in 6 months. And so he gave me the paperwork, in the same breath, the senior instructor said, Chaplain Northway, you need to know now, because of this dismissal, you will not be promoted in the primary zone.
Oh, my.
And, just the reality of that washing over me. And I said, okay, thank you for telling me. And it was so hard because I had just finished that hardest course, like I said, in my whole military career, that 4 months and that victory. And I'm thinking, and it was just this thing. And there was so much about it, though, that just didn't seem right. And I actually had another person on staff at the Chapman School say, I really think you need to call your home company commander, because didn't you have a one before you came? I said, yeah, I passed it and everything. And he said, just encourage you to see, there's some things that I keep seeing anomalies here that are happening for some of the courses. And it's not just you, but we keep seeing some problematic things where we're bringing people out here. And I think our best practices are not being fully engaged. I said, okay. I wasn't looking for really anything at that point. At that point, I was just thinking, gosh, I really needed a same gender take team. I really felt for me that would have made the difference because of how nervous I was at realizing that men were looking at my partially exposed body, and where I had to lift my shirt up in their presence. And so I called my company commander. He happens to be with my command sergeant major. She gets on the phone and she said, Chaplain Northway, what's going on? And I said, oh, Sergeant Major, I'm coming home. I was just dismissed from the course. And she says, what's going on? Tell me what happened. And so I told her, and she said, Chaplain Northway, it's Fort Jackson. The NCO Academy was there. All they had to do was walk across and ask for a couple of female NCOs to do this thing.
Goodness.
Why? I don't understand why that wasn't provided for you. And she said, you are not coming home until you've been to the commandant. I mean, she literally ordered me. And I'm like, oh, gosh, this is not what I want to do. And so I went back to my instructor. I said, hey, my command sergeant major, she's tracking, and she's ordered me to go to the commandant. He says, hey, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Do what you need to do. And I said, all right. So I went, and I knew of him. I'd met him before he was a commandant in small corps. And he said, Chaplain Northway, what can I do for you? And I said, sir, I'm here to ask for a third height weight, but this time for a first time. So it would be just like I've always had it as a soldier, an all-female height weight team that's just always been provided. And he said, let me find out what's going on. Chaplain Northway, I'm going to go across the bridge to the cadre. I'll come back in a few minutes, and I hope to have an answer for you. And I said, yes, sir, thank you. So I waited. He came back and pulled me back in his office, and he said, Chaplain Northway, I'm sorry, I've got bad news. And I said, yes, sir? He says, well, I just found out the first sergeant, she didn't actually have an all trained, fully trained, same gender height weight team to give you. And I said, sir, are you telling me if I had said yes, either or both of the times it was offered, she would not have been able to provide it? And he just hung his head. He didn't answer. He just hung his head. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, we're professionals. We're two officers. We're two chaplains. We've always been told if we ever offer something we cannot provide, we could get counseled. We could get reprimanded. We just don't do that. And it was devastating. And I see him he gets up. He walks over to his side desk. He opens a drawer. I'm thinking, what is he doing? So I'm in the in the most unimaginable time I didn't see coming, in my career, and he's fiddling with some drawer. So he opens a drawer and he walks over. He stands over me. I'm sitting in the same chair, and he leans over and he holds out his hand, and it's got a coin in it. And he says, Chaplain Northway, this is my coin. It's usually reserved for excellence. I'm putting it in your hands for the hope of future excellence when you return at some point.
Wow. Although that didn't fix your dilemma.
No.
And it didn't bring justice.
No.
It didn't right the wrong.
They say that, I've been told that there's only one chaplain in the U.S. Army who has command authority, and that is the commandant. So he had the capacity to do it, and I'm not a full expert, but I wondered often about that. Could that have been fixed? And certainly, as I walked away from that, and I had many people who breathe in the situation, and some people who don't know yet where the status is. They knew that I was working it. I was very encouraged, even on the sidewalk that day. I ran into the deputy chief of chaplains, who I had some great experiences with when I was part of USERPAC, and he heard of my situation. He said, "Chaplain Northway, never give up. Don't stop working this." And I've done that. I don't. Not
Is that what you're doing now?
That's what I'm doing now.
So, what are your options?
So, we've had a couple of times where we've sent it in. We sent it to the director of training. They said, "Oh, well, we can't do anything about that referred AER that's on your file." And I didn't actually know until I went into my above the zone this year. And I just the night before I signed, I said, "Oh my goodness, the referred AER academic evaluation report is still on there, even though I did go back and complete the class and got a 98 instead of a 92." And I was thinking erroneously that I guess that was going to be removed from my board file. Once I replaced it, it's still there. I'd also been told since then that I also what happened at this first course, I actually received an erroneous height weight that the Army is not allowed to take punitive action, like to dismiss you from a course, something like that, unless they use a completely different height weight team. And it would have been okay, the outcome. I would have to, should expect to live with that if they had used two completely different teams. But it was the same signatures, at least two of the three or so were the same people. And I certainly have all that documentation. That documentation has been, trying to work the issue at the lowest level possible, like my mentors have suggested, has not led to a positive outcome. I have had people say that it does need to be presented on a higher level. So I'm in that situation where continue to deal with it at the lowest level, but now be presented and get representation, at least in the Army, if not, hopefully not outside of the Army.
Is
first time.
You mentioned as you were beginning to share the story and the event that happened, you mentioned that you should have spoken up for your gender to help set the precedent. So as you fight this battle, you're fighting just for you?
No. In fact, someone said to me, there was definitely genders are involved in it, but really it's about both genders, that both men and women deserve to be able to have the same gender height weight team.
Very good.
It's not just about females. I mean,
right.
Can you imagine being a male and having to expose part of your body to a female.
Yes.
And many of us, we're the most cross-cultural population on the face of the American military, more than even other militaries, I think. And we have these sensitivities that have been given room for in the military. We have religious accommodations. We have all kinds of things. And in fact, my endorser since then said, if you were ever in this situation again, please stop what you're doing. I will give you a religious accommodation for modesty.
Oh, wow.
If nothing else.
Sure.
And I didn't, I didn't know to ask because I never was in that situation to need it. The amazing news, and this is really why I tell this story, and as we talked about the difference that God makes when it's important not to believe what you see in front of you. And I pray this with my soldiers and family members, that beyond a legal report, beyond a medical report, beyond an academic evaluation report, is a God in Jesus Christ who is truly the Alpha and Omega over each of our situations. No other person, entity, organization, no one gets that right or privilege outside of him over each of our situations and our lives and our livelihood. And so even though I have this situation, I'm looking forward to an outcome. I hope to be able to give you a sequel that I've hoped, and many people have prayed with me for in the meantime. And we know God works with us in our meantime, as he does throughout history. And that word meantime is in the book of Genesis, speaking of Joseph. In the meantime, there was always
Amen.
God was at work. Well, it looked like there was no hope. Well, it looked like I was being left for dead by my brothers in a pit, while I was sold into slavery, while I was maybe wrongly accused of taking advantage of Pharaoh's wife, while my brothers were arguing. In the meantime, God was doing something. And he says, what uh, what you or somebody, an enemy, may have meant for evil, God meant for good.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And that indeed is a difference in that God makes, is that you have hope because he's greater than all these things.
Absolutely. And I have lived to see that, even in the unknown, even in the meanwhile. This year, as what we prayed for was that really what I've always wanted wasn't always about being promoted on time or any time. It was about being able to continue to answer the call.
Yes.
To be able to do and be what gives me the greatest joy in Jesus Christ, this side of eternity, to be a chaplain, to be with those who are away from home for the first time, in transition, doing hard things. And this year, and even though I just said that I had signed that board file, realizing, oh my gosh, there's a paper in there that is so unhelpful that anybody would say there's nothing good can come from that, because that it wasn't replaced by the good report.
Yes.
The board met. Turns out I was passed over a second time, and this certainly I am experiencing some deep spiritual meaning with the words, the second Passover. We know that Jesus
Oh, goodness.
is the second Passover.
Yes.
And what happens in the military boards, they'll finish meeting, and if they have they'll sometimes in the chaplain corps they'll have a second board that meets after that process is over, completely standalone as far as the purpose. It might be the same people, but they meet to discover, is there anybody who was passed over on that list that would be worthy of continuing to be selected to continue indefinitely as at that rank, being eternal, from, in this case, an eternal major.
Yes.
That's my current rank. And I prayed that I would be able to, two things. I'd be able to continue to do what I absolutely love for as long as I could, for as long as the Army would allow, and that I would get to be co-located with my husband, because certainly there's been some geographical separation during some of the deployments, some of the missions, and we knew we wanted to be able to, as much as possible. Life is short, no guarantees, as we all know. We signed up for that, and to have that. So I found out, it takes a few months for that board to be released. Definitely found out what we thought, that promotion was not going to happen. It's the statistics go down with each board, that if you've missed your primary zone, that you could get promoted, even though your name does continue once you're assigned to the Army to stay in that group. I got something. The first official news that I found out came through Human Resources Command, stating, "We regret to inform you that you were not selected to be promoted to lieutenant colonel. In addition, you have been selected to continue as a major." And that was what I was waiting for. But then I looked at the paper, and I thought, surely this must be a typo. It said, because everybody knows that your mandatory age retirement is 62. And so that would, at this point, give me 3 more years, which I would be absolutely thankful for. But it said, it took me out to the year 2026, which that would put me out to 64. And I remember asking around, and, well, people, you might want to check that out. And I called my assignments officer, and I said, "Sir, is it a typo, or is that year correct that it potentially takes me to the age of 64? And he says, "Yes, chaplain, that's correct. You will have to ask for a waiver at age 61 to stay beyond 62. But yes, you have the possibility of everything, all things being equal, kind of everything is okay. You're still, making all the other benchmarks you need to make. You could potentially be here 64. I said, "Sir, are you saying that I potentially am going to be here? I could be here longer than some of the people who have been promoted to lieutenant colonel and colonel?" He says, Oh, yes, Chaplain Northway. That is exactly what it means.
Oh, my word. God answered your most important prayer. Not the promotion, but that you get to serve your soldiers.
Yes.
I'm so excited. That's so amazing. Thank you, Chaplain Lisa.
Thank
We'll
you.
continue next time.
Thank you.